Good day and welcome back to The Shed. Today we go back to the 1991 Hugo Award-winning novel for that year in Lois McMaster Bujold's The Vor Game. So what I would like to do, as always, is provide a spoiler-free plot overview. I'll talk to what I liked and what I didn't like in this one. We'll put it to the memory test. I'll make some recommendations and we'll rank it on our ever-growing sci-fi shed ladder, where there's already a couple of Lois McMaster Bujold novels on there, so it'll be interesting to see how this one compares. So when I reviewed Barrier on this channel, I made a comment that to really get the best out of that novel, you ought to read this Vor Game saga in internal chronological order. And I'm going to have to say the same holds true for the Vor Games as well. This is a wonderful, clever, really wonderful novel, but to get the best out of it, I think you really owe it to yourself to read The Warrior's Apprentice, the novel that came out before this one, because that really paints the story that makes the character in this novel, in Miles Vor Game, or Naismith, just the excellent character that he is, because it gives you so much more context as to what's driving Miles and how did he come to, be commander and admiral of this mercenary fleet. So look, I'm going to have to put that disclaimer right out there. Please have a read of The Warrior's Apprentice before you read The Vor Game, because I think it really shows just how wonderful this novel is. So we have Miles now back at the academy, and he's been told by his leaders, by the instructors, that look, here's your outpost. Spend 6 months in this God-forbidden frozen island as a weatherman. Just follow orders is all you need to do. Follow orders, and if you do that for 6 months and keep out of trouble, we're going to give you a placement on this flagship starship of the fleet. So just keep out of trouble. That was his prime directive and his first and foremost order. So Miles ends up on this frozen island, and he's sort of trying to keep out of trouble. But what he finds is that the commander on that frozen island is given some pretty dubious orders, and some that really are questionable, which results in Miles ending up with a charge of mutiny, which is something rather very serious when it comes to the Vor, these lords in this universe that Lois McMaster Bujold's written. Which coincidentally is also featured. The first 6 chapters of this novel are featured in a novella called The Weatherman, which is incorporated into this novel here. So I'd have to say, when you look at the chronological order, you can forego The Weatherman because it pretty much is covered in this novel here. So Miles, again, is acquitted of any wrongdoing on this frozen island, but his dad has still got this conundrum as to, what am I going to do with you, boy? You're a genius, but you can never follow orders. You just don't understand how this thing works, and what am I going to do with you? And Miles is sort of thinking, yeah, but I can't really follow these kind of crazy orders, so what am I to do? And his dad has this wonderful idea to say, you know what, I'm going to put you into the Imperial Security Forces, to the dismay of the leader of that ImpSec commander, because he's just thinking, I just got to keep you close where we can sort of keep an eye on you and make sure that you don't get into any trouble. And so they decide to put him in ImpSec, and it doesn't take long for him to get his first assignment there, to go into this hub where there's a whole lot of political volatile situation at the moment. There seems to be a lot of different kind of movement in there. We have Miles's former mercenary fleet involved to some degree, so they decide that it's best to reinstate Admiral Naismith, Miles's alter ego, to sort of go out there and investigate under the guise of this arms dealer. Anyway, things spiral out of hands, as they tend to do in the Vor Game saga, and we find Miles is arrested, only to find that his next door neighbor, his cellmate, is none other than Emperor Gregor. So all of a sudden now, we find that he's the only Imperial security at hand, and Emperor Gregor and Miles Vor Game grew up together as friends growing up. So now he has this duty as Imperial security to take care not only of his friend, but his sworn liege in Emperor Gregor, and somehow single-handedly he needs to reunite with his mercenary fleet, navigate this very political landscape that is very volatile and ready to erupt at any moment, and rescue Emperor Gregor, somehow remove all these allegations against him and somehow earn the respect of his father and the imperial sect. So what a wonderful novel I thought this one was indeed. So what is there to like in the Vor Game by Lois McMaster Bujold? Look, for me, it's got to have to be the characters. This is, the whole Vor saga really is a character-driven novel. And it is such a wonderful set of characters. I absolutely have grown to love the Vor saga. And I'll talk to why that is a little bit later on when it comes to the memory test. But I absolutely love the Vor saga. The characters are just an absolute delight for me. I absolutely love them, but you really ought to read them in chronological order because you're just going to miss out. I believe you're going to miss out, and I'll explain a little bit more when it comes to the memory test. So yeah, for me, the highlight, 100% the characters. The other thing I'd have to say is the writing. Lois McMaster Bujold is a kind of writer that just makes you want to devour these novels. Like, it's what is it? It's a 340-page book, but I read it in 3 days. I just could not put it down. And it largely goes to, yes, the characters for sure, but also the writing. It just keeps you engaged. I mean, these characters get into some crazy situations that just has you hunger for more. How are they going to get out of this? How's Miles going to turn this around? And it really is like that because, you know, if you've read the previous novels, that Miles has a tendency to get into situations that are just incredible. And how he manages with pure genius to get his way out of it makes it for, you know, it's going to happen. You know, Miles is somehow going to turn this situation around, but how is he going to do it? And I think that just keeps you engaged and it keeps you wanting to turn page after page after page. And I'm going to put it out there. Don't be surprised if you're, you know, sitting in bed reading this book at 3 o'clock in the morning because you can't put it down. It definitely has that kind of impact on me. The other thing I like to talk to in my like section is the plot itself. I really enjoy these Vor sagas because of the plot. I mean, she uses this, I'll call it a snowball technique in her novels, when Miles needs to make some kind of decision because he feels it's right, and it somehow has this snowball effect that seems to get him deeper and deeper and deeper into trouble, and you're just wondering, how is he going to get out of this? How's he going to overcome, and how's he going to manage all these different lies upon lies and deceit upon deceit and maneuver on top of maneuver to get out of this situation? And I think Lois McMaster Bujold does that so admirably that I absolutely love her for it. So that's a whole lot of praise for an unashamedly big fan. I'm an absolutely big fan of the Vor saga. But what is there I can say that did not necessarily hit the mark for me in this one? Look, one thing I'd have to say, and it's not a huge nitpick for me, it would have to be Miles' disability. Like, Miles is, you know, throughout all the Vor saga up until this point, and some of you who have read the whole Vor saga may have realised why I paused there for just a brief moment. But anyway, he's been born with very brittle bones. He has to wear leg braces because his bones are pretty much like chalk. And I can appreciate that, and it makes for an interesting character. But some of the physical assaults that Miles has to put up with that don't result in him breaking bones always has me second guessing just how brittle are his bones actually. Just how weak is this character really, because he does put up with quite a fair bit. And somehow I find that to be a little bit inconsistent. You know, his disability with what happens to him during the novel that sometimes I found hard to reconcile. Look, it's a minor criticism because it didn't take away from my enjoyment, but something that I definitely saw in my own reading that I think would make some people puzzled by it. The other thing I'd have to say for the Vor Game is that when I first read this novel, I didn't quite care for Miles. I found it a little bit unbelievable that he could get himself into a situation like this, and why are these people that he comes across so keen and eager to follow him? And I'd have to say that I'm going to make a note of in my dislike section, because I think it's very true if you come in cold. If this is the first of the Vor novels you'll ever read, you'll definitely walk away with that impression. So I'd have to say that on its own, I think if you were just coming in to read the Vor Game, I think that is the impression that you will get. And I'm going to put it in here in my dislike section as a caveat, because that was my first initial experience when reading the novel, which talks straight into my memory test. Like I've mentioned now several times, unless I've already edited it out, this was my first foray back 30 years ago when I first started reading the Vor saga. And I'd have to say that it didn't have the impact it did this time round when I decided to read the whole Vor saga anew, afresh, in chronological order. Because when it comes to the memory test, what I recall the first time I read this one is, I don't know if I like this Vor character, this Vor Mars Vor. I don't know if he's a believable character, and I'm not quite sure what the big hoorah is. Why do people say that this guy is so brilliant? And that was my memory recollection of this one. And to be honest, I can't recall much of the plot as well, because this is the first time in years that I've read the Vor Game. So I think what I will say when it comes to the memory test, as a standalone novel, you're doing yourself a disservice. Don't start with the Vor Game, because my experience, having read this now in chronological order, is that these characters are absolutely unforgettable. And I would have to say that of the whole Vor saga. So to highlight that, right, there's a passage in here that Miles sees one of the characters that featured pretty significantly in Cordelia's Honor, the Shards of Honor and Barrier, and it sort of takes a line or two in this novel, but as soon as you read it, you think, oh, Joel's, oh, that is fantastic. How cool is it to see Joel's here? And some of the body language and the little smirk that he has in his face takes you back to Barry, and you think, how cool was that character? And if you didn't have that background, that literal 2 or 3 sentences that made up Joel's journey in this novel would just be insignificant. But me, having read all of these novels now in chronological order, I saw that as a highlight in the novel, right? Just again to stress just how important it is for me, I believe, to read this in chronological order, which goes straight into my recommendations. Look, I absolutely love the Vor Game. It's an absolutely wonderful novel, but the recommendation is please, please, please read these in internal chronological order, because you will get the best. It's been my personal experience, right? I wouldn't be here talking to you so passionately if I hadn't decided to reread these wonderful novels in chronological order. And it has turned me into a person who was saying, yeah, these are good novels, they're pretty interesting, very good plots, great characters, into someone who says this is an absolutely must-read series that you owe it to yourself to read, right? So I really do want to stress that. But I'd have to say, and we've mentioned it in the past, you probably don't have to start with Falling Free, which is in the same universe, but the qualities in this novel were so wonderful, they're so well done, that I would have to say you're missing out anyway. But I would have to say that Falling Free, I'd say you don't necessarily need to start here. But where you do need to start, I highly recommend, will be something like Cordelia's Honor, because what this has got both the Shards of Honor and Barrier combined in one edition, and it only is like what is it, just shy of 600 pages, 580 odd pages, but that's a great intro into this wonderful universe, and you really see how Cordelia and Count Vor sort of meet, how they fall in love, and what caused the injuries and the deformities that we find in Mars Vor. And I'd have to say, definitely follow that up with The Warrior's Apprentice, because it's absolutely wonderful. There's also another short novella in there where Miles goes and he's basically a judge in a murder trial. I have read that in the past, but again, I'd have to say, if you want to skip that novella, you're probably going to be okay. I don't think it's going to take too much away from the whole reading experience. You can also forego The Weatherman, because that's again largely incorporated into the Vor Game. And then please have a look at the Vor Game. Game. You won't be disappointed. I'm honest, sincerely saying that. And then there's also a couple of more novels, but we'll talk to that when it comes to us reviewing Mirror Dance, which is also one, a Hugo, I think also a Nebula. I'd have to double check. So I'll talk to the novels preceding this one when we review Mirror Dance in the not too distant future. So that's a whole lot to say. We've got to rank this on the board. So let me flip the cameras around and see exactly where this one goes tonight. Back to the Sci-Fi Shed ladder to rank today's 1991 Hugo Award-winning novel by Lois McMaster Bujold, The Vor Game. And this is going to be really interesting because it's a wonderful series, but I've got to apply my criteria that I've documented down below consistently. So I've got to take this book not as a series but as a standalone. So where is it going to sit on this wonderful board where we've come to the tail end of all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels? Because there's some absolute classics on here. So when I look at the concept, trying to look at the Vor Game alone, I thought it was an interesting concept, but not necessarily the most fascinating concept we see in science fiction. It really is a character-driven novel, so it got wonderful marks for character development and just enjoyment of those characters, but the concept didn't necessarily get the top marks. I mean, it is interesting. We have this very politically volatile environment in the Vor Game saga. There's a lot of political intrigue. So look, yeah, even having said that, I'm probably going to have to readjust the concept because I didn't talk to it during my plot overview, but there's a lot of really interesting world building, specifically political world building in the Vor Game. So yeah, I'm just going to edit my concept rating on the fly here because I think I initially underestimated just how interesting the concept here is in this one. When it comes to the execution, it got top marks. I really enjoyed the execution. Same with the writing, and especially the ending. When I finished this book, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I just couldn't put it down. And I just had the biggest smile on my face. Pardon me. So yeah, got wonderful points for the ending because I just couldn't wait to get on to the sequels in this one and take a look at Setaganda, which is the next novel in the series. So really good marks for the concept, the writing, the execution, the characters. Where I did take a couple of marks off was for the memory test because I'm trying to be consistent and fair, and there wasn't much I could really remember from the Vor Game itself that sort of really held the memory test. But the Vor Game saga definitely is a very memorable series, but I'd have to say that some of the events that happened in the novel didn't necessarily, last the test of time. So where's it going to sit? It's going to be a really difficult one because purely from an enjoyment point of view, I reckon we're looking at the A side here, and I'd have to say it's going to sit somewhere right on top. It's a really enjoyable series, but again, is the Vor Game everything that people say it is? And I'd have to say it is, but as a standalone, I'm going to have to knock it down a couple of pegs and say it's not going to challenge some wonderful concepts, some giants in the sci-fi genre, wonderfully written novels, mind-blowing concepts on the top end of the board. So maybe let's start with the last time we saw Lois McMaster Bujold on the board, and that was on the B side. And I'm not going to bother flipping the board to the B side in Barrier. I think she was sitting somewhere in the middle here with Barrier again, because as a standalone novel, was it all of that? And I had some question marks. But as a series, again, it really deserves its place on the board. But I'm not going to flip the board because I want to go straight to Falling Free, which is where Bujold last saw the A side of the board. And I'm going to say that Falling Free was brilliant, and I really liked the quaddies, and I really liked the characters in that novel. But you cannot compare them to the characters that we have in the Vor Game. So even if everything else was equal when it comes to my criteria, I'm going to have to say it's going to be somewhere way up there compared to Falling Free. So when we have novels like Ringworld, I mean, wonderful concepts, but the characters were not all great. I mean, I didn't really care so much for the characters. And there were some question marks in the plot as well. Oh man, this is going to be incredibly different because I paused there for a moment. Because we've got some giants, like we got Ringworld, Neuromancer, Starship Troopers, The Moon's a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land, Fountains of Paradise. This Immortal, The Left-Handed Darkness, and The Dispossessed. I mean, what a giant... I mean, all these novels could be, and I'm sure every single novel that I've nominated and I'll talk to through there is probably someone's best novel of all time. This is just how great these novels are. But as I'm looking through this, I'm going to have to say it's going to either be before or after Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed and The Left-Handed Darkness. Because I think it's just that good of a novel for different reasons, very different reasons. But I'm going to have to say, Ursula, you're a poet. These novels were just brilliantly written novels, really wonderful concepts, just genre defining, wonderful novels. And I'm going to have to say all of that, I believe, is also true for Lois McMaster Bujold. But if I was to crown someone the queen of science fiction, and I had a choice between Lois McMaster Bujold, Ursula Le Guin, and Connie Willis, I'm going to have to say, please let someone else decide. But when it comes to the Sci-Fi Shed, and in particular the Vor Game, I'm going to give it to Ursula. Because I think her writing is just exquisite. It's beautiful. She's a beautiful writer. And I think the Vor Game in Lois McMaster Bujold is not going to challenge those two wonderful novels today, at least. Be interesting to see what happens when we read Mirror Dance and have to rank that on the board. Hey, are you a big fan? I honestly am a big fan. To hear your comments. Are you a bigger fan as I am? Have you read the Vorkosigan saga? Have you potentially read the in outside of chronological order? And what are your views? Do you agree with me or disagree with me that maybe that's not the best way to read this? I really would love to hear your comments, because I did read it the first time outside of chronological order, and I can definitely say I didn't feel the way I do today about the whole series, having the opportunity now to reread it in chronological order. As always, I hope to see you next time in the shed.